Thank you all very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join this webinar today. My name is Charles Green. I'm part of the marketing team here at Balatrix Software. And today we're going to be discussing the new innovation playbook for chief technology officers as well as for other technology leaders. And this is really going to address some of the new methods that we see organizations using today to drive their new digital technology agendas. Today's session is going to be very open, so if you have a question at any time, do let me know, and you can do this either by typing into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen on the GoToMeeting, or you can do it via Twitter. So we're going to be tweeting throughout the webinar using the hashtag InnovationBSF. So you can use Twitter to follow us along as to the content of the webinar, but also do use it to ask us questions as well, and we'll be monitoring that stream. For those of you who are not familiar with Balatrix, just very briefly, we're a leading provider of software development services with expertise in product and mobile application development. Our focus is on innovation and really shaping the concepts and ideas of our clients into world-class software products. We have delivery centers in Mendoza and Buenos Aires in Argentina, as well as Lima, Peru. But without further ado, I really want to jump into the content, and it's going to be a pretty simple agenda for the rest of the call. And it's going to be a relatively short webinar today, about 20 to 25 minutes of presentation, and then leaving some time for your questions at the end. Through the overview of what we see happening from our research with traditional corporate R&D approaches, and then lead you through some of the newer methods that organizations are using to really drive these digital technology agendas in 2015. And to really just kick this off then, one of the major trends which we see at the moment is that there is a shift away from the central R&D organization to look into new methods for innovation. That the budgets which executives in the past allocated to R&D are now being allocated to new and to different areas. And it's these newer techniques such as hackathons, such as developing incubators, such as setting up a digital lab or an innovation lab that this webinar is really going to focus on. Now this has really come about because of the disjuncture between investment in R&D and the returns that companies see from those investments in R&D on innovation. So what it really means is that the increased R&D spending doesn't correlate with increased innovation. And there are countless examples of that which you can take from corporations. For example, in 2011, Nokia was one of the highest R&D spenders in the world, spending $8 billion on their research and development initiatives. Yet for all that investment, there was very little success. And indeed, Nokia for years was one of the highest R&D spenders. They outspent Apple several times over in the years preceding the iPhone, but they still could not effectively compete once the iPhone emerged from Apple. And you can take that, you can also look at, for examples, in other areas as well, in other industries. For example, if you look at automotive manufacturers, you look at, for example, companies such as Toyota, Volkswagen, Honda, each spend massive amounts of money each year on R&D. Toyota, they spent $9.1 billion in 2014. Honda, $6.3 billion. And yet, arguably the most innovative company in the automotive industry at the moment is Tesla. And you look at Tesla and the range of innovations that are coming out from them, whether it's their the components that feed their electric cars, whether it's their charging stations, whether it's their manufacturing process, whether it's their sales model, or it's the user experience that you receive inside and outside the vehicle, or it's the automatic software updates. There are countless examples of really where they're providing real genuine innovation in the automotive industry that we just haven't seen from traditional manufacturers. And one of the reasons behind this is that in many cases the R&D expenditure is spent on supporting existing historical businesses and driving incremental innovation. That in many cases companies are looking to defend their competitive advantage by investing in new R&D, but it's not really also new innovation. So it's really at this time of rapid change, at this time of digital disruption where new technology is upending entire business models and industries, these are traditional approaches to innovation simply no longer work and are no longer effective. And again, if you look then more closely at the software industry, for example, where you see software companies, many software companies have very highly talented engineers who really desire to build new products. They want to use their capabilities as engineers, which is what really they learn to do, to develop new products and new services. But the challenge for software companies is that there's this need to continue to update and maintain the software for their existing customer base. And this becomes a continual drag away from their ability to invest in new ideas and new products. And as a side note, this is actually one reason why end-of-life support has been a growing service line for many specialist software product development service providers in recent years, as it enables these software companies to then change their focus away from that and now focus on new product development. So we've seen then that there's this shift away, that business executives are reconsidering the money that they allocate to their main traditional R&D efforts. What we want to do is look at, okay, where is that money then going to? And what we can see then is that there are what we can term so-called innovation enablers. And this is really the main theme of the presentation today, that these innovation enablers are new ways to drive innovation in organizations. And they're going to become much more widespread amongst corporations because they really help companies with cheaper and faster methods of creating innovation. And so we're going to be discussing some of the methods, which include hackathons, digital labs, innovation labs, incubators, and other forms of startup accelerators. But it also is going to be looking at some of the impact of technology as well, and in particular the impact of open data, very closely related to big data, and open APIs as well, which make it comparatively much cheaper and easier to create new services based on existing platforms and products. But they really represent a very different approach to creating an innovation agenda than what your normal typical expenditure would be in a corporate R&D environment. And looking at some of the reasons as to why some of these innovation enablers have come to the forefront of companies' innovation efforts, and you can really see four main reasons behind this. Firstly, that they help spur rapid prototyping and development. So time to market continues to be a critical measure of success for organizations, particularly as technology continues to upend products, and the life cycle for technology is shorter and shorter. It means getting your product to market faster than ever before is a critical priority for many organizations. So each of these approaches, which we just saw in the previous slide, help organizations rapidly develop and prototype new products and services, which can then be iteratively improved. Particularly, for example, if you look at hackathons, some of the hackathons which we've run here at Bellatrix, the idea is to create a prototype of a new product within 8 hours or less. So really very, very rapid prototyping being a key element here. Secondly, that they represent significantly lower costs than centrally funded R&D efforts. You saw there some examples of very significant amounts of money being spent on centrally funded R&D efforts in the past by some major corporations. And these newer methods are particularly attractive because of their lower costs, and particularly in comparison to the more traditional efforts. Thirdly, that they help foster creativity by bringing together disparate perspectives. Again, in the example of, say, a hackathon, hackathons really aim to bring people together who would not normally be working together. Their day-to-day job is not about creating new products. It's not about R&D. But when you bring those together, they can often bring in insights that perhaps you would not otherwise have realized or would not have otherwise seen. And finally, it helps to take advantage of the increasing availability of data. Really, the growth in data, the emergence of big data, have really upended again, transformed the potential for many organizations, and again linked then to open data, where data which was previously inaccessible now becomes available to you. Is often then the potential is to see, okay, what happens if we take some of that data, we mash it together with some of our own corporate data, and then we add in, we put on a maps, for example, from Google Maps, and then you can provide very quickly new ideas, new services, new products, very much based on the new availability of data. So now I want to look now at some of these new innovation enablers in more detail. And to start with, I want to look at hackathons. Here are a couple of pictures which we have taken from the hackathons which we've run at Bellatrix, and we run hackathons on a pretty regular basis here. And they have really become the poster child of the CTO's new innovation playbook. That you see hackathons being run by a myriad of different organizations, whether it's a startup in Silicon Valley or whether it's a more traditional organization. You see hackathons being used more and more. And that also represents partly because of they're very flexible. You can change the structure of a hackathon depending on exactly what you want to do. And in our experience, some of the best practices which we've seen, both from our experience and from what we've seen other companies do, is that make sure to shift the emphasis away from just writing code. So while the history of hackathons really comes from the technology sector, and while many hackathons require participants with some technical skills, it's typically this combination of both technical and non-technical employees which help create the most powerful force for new ideas. And for example, the company Shutterstock, the image company, they, for instance, they have a rule requiring that teams in their hackathons include people from at least 3 different departments. So for example, from marketing, from human resources, from accounting, and you bring in many of these newer perspectives, and you bring in individuals who wouldn't typically be involved in these innovation efforts. Secondly, what we're seeing some companies do is to use prizes really to motivate people to participate in the hackathon, but also by using an intelligent approach to prizes, you can lay the basis for the next hackathon. And so, for example, one company, they included cash prizes for their winners, but they had the condition that the winners needed to spend that money within 24 hours and then report back on how they spent that money. So again, so you can create the stories, what did the winning team actually do with that money? So for example, if they went out, say, to a restaurant for a meal, or they took a trip, that you can then use the stories behind that to motivate future participants in your hackathons. Thirdly, don't insist that the hackathon is just about you. So while you may be hoping that the hackathon will bring you your next great product idea, limiting the scope of the hackathon or setting very restrictive rules really defeats the purpose. So what we're seeing successful companies do here is that typically you provide a general theme or an overarching goal for the hackathon, but you need to allow as much freedom for innovation as possible. And finally, it's necessary to remember to follow up afterwards. So to avoid missing out on the potential of new ideas developed during the hackathon, schedule a series of follow-ups involving your product teams, your R&D, your management to discuss the results. So what aspects and improvements can immediately fit into your product roadmap and which will require greater investment? Okay, and so for those of you who really perhaps are still slightly skeptical about the use of hackathons, do remember that, of course, there are many examples of companies who are doing it. One interesting example that we've seen is from actually the CERN organization, which is the Center for Nuclear Research based in Switzerland. And this organization, they've set up this hackathon, which is going to be lasting for 3 days. They've invited industry-leading experts from different industries to try and solve really major social and key issues which industry and society faces. And that's going to be a 3-day hackathon later this year. So moving on then, I want to switch the conversation slightly now to look at APIs. Now, one of the key drivers behind the explosion in digital startups is the emergence of open application programming interfaces, or APIs. And really, APIs have become one of the reasons behind the so-called Cambrian explosion in digital startups. So the Cambrian explosion being where life forms nearly 500 million years ago started to rapidly multiply, resulting in the emergence of varied and more complex life forms. And we see a similar thing happening with new startups which rely on some of the new technologies to drive innovation and drive new services. And so what we're seeing is that these APIs provide the accessibility to data and information which become then the building blocks to new innovative services. APIs enable organizations to open up select access to their data to developers. Now, the emergence of APIs as the spur for new innovation is closely and intricately linked to the increasing availability of data. And again, what we mentioned slightly earlier was that this movement to open data and the open data movement is also a key part of that, because it's led to much greater availability of previously inaccessible data. For example, if you consider the Open Government Initiative from President Obama to healthcare organizations such as Healthgrades, which help individuals select a healthcare professional. So what this does is it provides opportunity to combine the data which is currently available and perhaps combine that with your enterprise data in your databases, and then by bringing those two together, you can produce very new, innovative types of products and services. But one thing it should be noted that developing effective APIs will require some level of investment, because you want to be attracting developers to create new services based on your data. And to do that, you're going to need to provide enterprise-grade APIs. And that means you want to ensure the security and scalability and the overall experience of your API to attract developers to using it. In addition, it's critical to consider the API as the key mechanism to build a data-driven community, that more and more organizations can perhaps start to look at your data and say, okay, how can they use that data to produce new ideas, to produce new products? In many cases, there may be ideas that you just simply haven't considered in the past. But by opening up select access to your data, there is new opportunity here. And then you can build up a broader range beyond just your own enterprise walls. And I think particularly for those of you who are interested in the evolving world of data monetization, providing this access to select data, which is normally held behind your firewall, represents new opportunities. So how can you start to monetize that data? What are the new business models which underlie that data? And what are the new products, again, which that data is going to drive. So then looking at innovation labs. Now, innovation labs are have really come to the forefront of many organizations' innovation efforts in recent years. And one of the key reasons behind that is because they provide a path around the corporate hierarchy. It helps organizations by creating a separate area which can then focus on new ideas or focus on areas adjacent to the main business. In any mid to large organization, there will be bureaucracy or roadblocks, simply unavoidable. So by setting up a lab, it helps you ensure that your new product development efforts are lean, they're creative, and they're fast. And it helps avoid this level of bureaucracy, which in almost every organization you're going to find. So typically, the labs will be somewhere separate from the main corporate offices, and sometimes even they'll be located in different cities. But again, one of the key motivating factors is again this emphasis on time to market. That to create new products quickly, you need a different approach from what you're doing at the moment. So what we see is some of the best practices here for innovation labs or digital labs. So firstly, resist the temptation to bring the digital lab into the corporate fold. So companies such as Walmart, who have had success with their digital labs, have ensured that it has a very different culture, environment, and even very different priorities to the main corporation. For example, the office space will typically be open plan to reflect the flat organizational structure. They will have group spaces, whiteboards, and walls which you can write on. And in many cases, you'll even have a separate name. So for example, here with Walmart, they had the name Walmart Labs, so to give that a slightly separate identity to the main organization. It's important, however, to manage any potential tension between the lab and the mothership. So while setting up a lab can have very beneficial impact, that there can sometimes be tension between those employees who are in the main corporate environment and those who are in the lab, perhaps working on the kind of so-called cooler aspects and the newer aspects. That you need to be able to manage that tension in a proactive manner. And there are different ways you can do that. For example, you may want to rotate individuals into the lab and then out of the lab after a certain time period, for example. So there are different ways in which you can manage that tension. Thirdly, make sure that the lab is looking to partnerships. So while setting up the lab is the first step, make sure it's also willing to look to partnership, for example, with local universities or local technology companies, in the case of a digital lab, to help further drive and encourage innovation and really give them that freedom to engage in these partnerships on their own terms, rather than perhaps going through the standard process for setting up partnerships, which can be, again, relatively bureaucratic in many organizations. And finally, look to innovation hubs, but not just Silicon Valley. So as mentioned before, many digital labs are set up in different office spaces, sometimes in different cities and sometimes in different geographies. So there are many companies which have decided to set up their digital lab in the kind of the mecca of technology innovation in Silicon Valley, and particularly as they see that the ever greater proportion of the value of their products and services comes from software, then there are many companies who want to then set up an office in Silicon Valley, but it shouldn't just be there. So for example, AT&T Labs, for instance, they have a presence in the Valley, but also in other tech hubs such as Plano in Texas, and also in Israel. You can also look to other high-tech clusters from London to Berlin to Bengaluru to Buenos Aires to find the specific skills that are most appropriate for your needs. Argentina, for example, they have a very strong reputation for combining the very strong technical skills together with design capabilities and a broader creativity skill sets. Now, there are a number of different examples from companies which have set up labs. One of the interesting ones here is that Deutsche Bank, for example, they've looked to partners for their labs. They have been part of, they're part of the banking industry, which is going through monumental change driven by new technology. That they are faced with new competitors, new digitally native competitors who have no branches, who do everything online. And that presents a whole new set of challenges for a much more traditional bank, such as the Deutsche Bank. So they're trying to fend off some new competitors. If you think, for example, companies such as Simple in the US, which do everything online and they differentiate via their user experience. How does a bank like the Deutsche Bank compete with them? Well, what they did then was to set up innovation labs with various technology companies, including IBM, Microsoft, HCL Technologies, to really help improve their transition to becoming a digital bank. Meanwhile, in the automotive sector, one of the fascinating trends in the past few years has been that more and more automotive companies have decided to open labs and offices in Silicon Valley. As the connected car becomes really a distinct and unique computing environment, so companies from Hyundai to Ford, BMW, Nissan, Continental to Electrobit have all realized that they need the sophisticated technological and particularly software expertise that they can find in the Valley. And you can see here, this is taken from the Wall Street Journal, where you just see a pretty strong presence from the traditional car manufacturers, but also some new companies such as Tesla and Google. They're all being based in the Valley. But it's interesting to see exactly what they're doing in the Valley. So, for example, they're taking different approaches. So, BMW and Delphi, they have set up corporate venture capital groups. Other companies have set up corporate development offices. Other companies such as Daimler and Ford have set up research labs, while yet more other different companies, such as BMW, have set up incubators so they can make specific investments in automotive-focused startups. And I think that's actually a very good segue to the next topic, which is looking at incubators. So really separate from setting up your own digital lab, increasingly firms are investing in startups and potential partners. And this really enables them to create a startup mentality and avoid the slow-moving behemoth of their organizations, which all too often kills innovation. So in a sense, forming an incubator or an accelerator enables companies to start to act like a venture capital. And it's really, very, again, as mentioned, very separate from setting up a digital lab, but really making specific investments in startups and potential partners. And we've seen various large organizations really doing that, and it provides a new way or different way to engage with startups and ensure that you remain really at the very cutting edge, at the forefront of technological developments or the new developments in your particular industry. For example, Barclays, they started an accelerator program together with venture capitalist Techstars. So again, if you're not in position perhaps to set up your own incubator, you may want to then look to partners who have expertise in the startup world, who have expertise with entrepreneurs, who can then help you start up this particular innovation fund. And again, there are, it really helps you, again, as mentioned, it helps you maintain this startup mentality. And then again, numerous examples of organizations which have done that. Looking here at the BBC Worldwide Labs. The BBC have realized the benefit of this approach. So this labs program is a digital media startup accelerator program which provides small companies with mentors, with infrastructure, with partnerships. And here the BBC, they select 6 startups to join the program, and then they integrate them into the BBC ecosystem. They provide the necessary infrastructure, including office space at BBC Worldwide. They provide them with mentoring with both internal and external industry experts. They have a dedicated labs team which helps to facilitate discussions and amongst the various business units and brands at BBC Worldwide. And it also really helps to encourage the collaboration and partnerships amongst different entities. And the goal really behind that, the goal behind all this effort and investment, is to strategically and commercially partner with and support the most innovative up-and-coming digital media companies that are really helping to define the emerging digital landscape, and somewhere where the BBC, again, really needs to be at the very forefront of what's happening. Looking at another example, this is from Microsoft Ventures. So Microsoft Ventures brought together many of Microsoft's existing incubator startup programs to one unified approach they launched a little while ago. And this program brings together different aspects. It brings together aspects including a community which supports entrepreneurs, to programs which give access to Microsoft tools and technologies, to programs also to the accelerator program, where the startup or the company will attend for, say, 3 to 6 months to get access to mentors, to technical and design experts and other resources. And finally, even investing in startups via its funding program, where Microsoft invests in certain companies once they have achieved some early business successes. So again, as you can see, there are numerous different examples, and there's a lot of flexibility depending on what is most appropriate for your business and exactly what you want to do. And with that, it really brings me to coming to the close of today's presentation. I want to end with just a couple of very quick recommendations before I leave some time for your questions. But as mentioned, there are really a myriad of possibilities to use the techniques that I've described so far. Often these techniques are characterized by their simplicity. If you think about a hackathon, it's not rocket science to create a hackathon, and you can create a hackathon which is exactly how you want it. So you can modify that depending on your needs. So again, remember, don't reinvent the wheel. Make sure you take the best practices from both your industry but also across industries. What are other companies doing? Are other companies running some of these newer innovation efforts? How are they looking to be at the forefront of their particular industry? And finally, look to partners with expertise in these new techniques. So, for example, you saw there some of the examples, Barclays in there, when they wanted to set up an incubator program, they deliberately looked to people with venture capital expertise. They looked at people with connections, with expertise in that particular environment. You may want to look to different places, look at different geographies to find those partners. But again, sometimes you may want to do it yourself, but again, other times you may want to look to partners. And finally, I would just remember that make sure there is coordination between these efforts and your traditional R&D efforts. While at one of the early slides I showed you had a gravestone of corporate R&D, it's not really, these may not necessarily reflect the complete death of corporate R&D, but it does represent a new way where some of the spending is going to go in the future. And with that, I would like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today and open up for any questions. I should mention that you can ask a question either on the GoToMeeting or via Twitter using the hashtag InnovationBSF.